Hello. So, this is a story about a Ripe Atlas probe, maybe. Oh. So, first of all, a little bit about me. I've worked for the same company for around about 15 years, but we've been acquired twice as part of that, which is always a fun time, as you can imagine. I chair the program committee for UKNOF for my sins, and I'm a box ticker on the autism spectrum. Now, I mention this because I think a lot of people are in this room, probably. It's very common in the IT industry, and not enough people acknowledge that. So right now, I'm terrified being up here. It's so far out of my comfort zone, it's unreal, but we're doing it anyway. So this is a story about a company called Knowledge IT, who were a managed services provider. Essentially, we were engineers and consultants for hire, and we ultimately delivered Cisco projects and cloud and things like that. We ended up building an ISP, 160 rack data center, and various other things. And you've probably never heard of us. We were about a £12 million turnover, I think, when Onyx acquired us. But we won major awards. We won I think in 2007, we won the Cisco Award for the largest wireless network in Northern Europe for a couple of hospitals that we'd actually enabled. So you've probably never heard of us. So does anyone in this room not know what a Ripe Atlas probe is? No, good, you all know. So you're probably thinking this is probably the shortest presentation ever. I'll be asking for any questions right now. Well, not really. Normally you just plug it in, you wait for the email from Ripe, you plug it in, and away you go. But this is about doing it the hard way. So this is specifically about this. Now, I apologize to Adrian. I saw that picture online, and I just thought it was great for this. And it's probably the best person to put on there. So it's actually, in some respects, about IPv6, okay? And it's about a project that we did way back in 2014-ish. And it's about a little, well, say a little, it's a customer of ours where essentially it's a 9-building campus, and they required a network refresh. And in some respects split from us. It was a pop on our network, and it was a little bit interesting. There was common layer 2 there, and it wouldn't be the first time that someone had decided that resiliency was involved by plugging a hub into 2 switches, put it that way. Their funding was primarily from tenants and rent and things like that, but they also got grants from the EU, and this is part of that, so obviously they're really happy right now. But essentially they required value and resilience in any investment that they made, and we had a very close working relationship from them. So it wouldn't be the first time that I would go down to site with a problem, and the good problem of that is we had a tenant who mailed the customer, and the customer said, well, we've got a problem. You're routing Microsoft IP addresses. You're overriding our DHCP. How dare you? Which was quite interesting because we didn't do DHCP for that network. So we went down, and the tenant was there, and he told me I was clueless. And I said, okay, well, what IP address are you getting? We're getting this IP address, 169.25. Okay. But that was the kind of relationship we had, and we were there to back them up, and that's why they have the reputation it was, because they get people like me to go down and talk their tenants through. Now, so this is about the network refresh, and we'll start with the old. The old I call justified and ancient because, one, I'm a KLF fan, and two, that equipment had certainly justified its existence, and it certainly was ancient. It was 2950s, 3500 XLs, it was PIX 1515s, it was OM2 fiber on a riverside, which, if you've ever been, rats aren't always friendly, so it kind of ran at 1 gig, sort of. It was some interesting locations on the network, some external cabinets, some facilities cupboards, where, for example, you had mesh doors on, and you ended up with switches which got quite dusty, and you could draw pretty faces in them and things like that. I'd like to say that's the worst switch I've ever seen, but the worst switch I've ever seen was in a tea factory that went bang, and you turned it up, and you essentially got a number of tea bags split apart coming out, and the best thing was, though, if you're in that building for more than 15 minutes, you couldn't actually drive for 30 minutes afterwards because you were high as a kite from all the caffeine in the air. So the new, again, this is a small campus network, and it wasn't a huge budget, so it's not like an ISP-level project, and I'm coming from the managed services, sort of professional services arena. So it was 3750Xs, 3560Xs, new single-mode fiber. We had a cabling team. There's 2 DHCP servers. We had lots of DL360s at the time to throw around, some ASAs, and some 3925s. Now, so where this gets interesting is essentially the first part of the project was obviously getting the fiber in, and that's where it got a little bit more convoluted. So I started going to UKNOF in 2011. Now, one of the things with my UKNOF hat on is we get a lot of first-timers who tell us that the community can be quite I guess cliquey can be the word sometimes, or not really inviting. That's not strictly the case. There's an awful lot of people here who have known each other for a very, very long time. But they think that, you know, they're excluded in some respects. They're not, because I was you. I was the first timer in this room. I was you in 2011. I walked into the Adelphi in Leeds. I knew what Andy Davison looked like. He was in a conversation with someone, and I went, oh, I'm on the autistic spectrum. I'm really out of my comfort zone. What do I do? But I'm also a northern monkey, so I went and got a pint. And I stood there, and then this guy walks in, and he looks more lost than I am. And I just had to say, are you here for UKNOF? Oh, thankfully, yes. Yes, I know someone here now, sort of. And that's a guy called Chris Bagnall. He's here today. So we were all first times at someone. The point is this, UKNOF is what you choose to make it. You've got to go and approach people. You've got to get involved with it as well. Another thing that happened during this time was the technical director moved on, someone I'd worked with for 8 years. And the MD thought the whole network was going to fall apart. Well, no, because I did an awful lot of it. Onyx came in for us. Now, anyone who's been through an acquisition will tell you that's an interesting time. You essentially have a large curve. So the peaks are when you go, this is a huge company, it's going to be so much better, there's going to be so much more resources, so many interesting things to do. Then you have the troughs, which are, they already have a load of good engineers. And I knew the Onyx guys, Andy Brown, Simon Woodward, great guys. Simon's a great manager as well. And then you bottom out somewhere in a plateau, and that plateau is somewhere between, well, I can either just crack on with things, or I can worry about it, and you get completely demotivated. So I was kind of varying between those two plateaus at some point. Customers started constructing a new building off-site, and I kind of started thinking, bear in mind, I'm on that spectrum, so my mind wanders, and I kind of had to distract myself. So I started thinking about things I learned at UKNOF, and I started redesigning it in my head while we were waiting for the fibre to come along. So let's make our life difficult and do it the hard way. So one, let's put the Atlas probe on V6. Second of all, let's flood the entire network with V6. Let's use OSPF. Now, appreciate everyone in this room because probably used OSPF. I'd used it a little bit on our core, but all the customer stuff was all the Edge RP, so I didn't know it backwards. And can we use these magical things called VRFs? Now, my ISP network was a big layer 2 ring around the northeast, so VRFs and MPLS was all new to me. Yeah? Again, it comes down to why you come to UKNOF. And I was a bit crazy. So I started talking about V6, and then this happened. So it was kind of interesting, some of the reactions, which varied from crying, telling me I shouldn't do it, going, what the hell are you thinking, type scenarios. But I had a really good technical director, a guy called Steve Tron. He's sadly moved on from us now, but he had a different way of thinking. And his argument was, we're a technology company. We should be pushing things. Now we can either sit on our laurels and just wait, or we can try and do things. So the customer was very, very friendly with us. So if the customer's happy for you to do it, document the hell out of it, and I'll give you a shovel. If you get yourself in a problem, you have to dig yourself out of it. Business case for V6. Is there one? When you've got lots of V4 in that? Is there? Sort of. And we'll get to that. So the fun begins, and the addressing plan. Now, I could stand up here and I could talk to you all about addressing plans and go through all V6, and it would all be great, and we've done it many times before, so I'm not going to. RIPE's IPv6 course is really good. HE.net offer a SAGE program, but I'd done my RIPE IPv6 course in 2011. This was now 2014. I couldn't remember a damn thing. Now, I could go through with you and tell you when I got my light bulb moment, and it is a light bulb moment. It's when you stop thinking one way and start thinking another. But Tom Coffey and Veronica did a great presentation about this in UKNOF41. Please go and look at it. Please watch the YouTube videos. You will get to where I've been very much quicker. But ultimately, think in subnets and supernets, and nibble boundaries are your friend, 52s, 56s. So essentially, I started mapping subnets. So how many subnets do I need on the firewall? Well, I need 5. Okay, well, I can throw a /60, which is 60 and 64s. And yes, now we have things like 127s and et cetera, and it goes further down, but I quite like nibble boundaries. And at the time, there's certainly no pressure to not conserve addresses. So the tenant network was a /16, so we'll use /56. Staff, again, /16, we'll use a 56. Internet space network was /29s, so we'll use /60s. And again, I then put it in a spreadsheet. And believe me or not, certainly the knowledge entire /19 is in a spreadsheet still. But this was a lot easier. I wasn't bothered about hosts. I was more bothered about supernets. I'll kind of go down the hosts a bit later. But we should probably test something. Now, It's quite ironic because the larger the company that I've been involved with, the less lab equipment I have locally. So I had to find some way to do this. And I tend to squirrel things. So we had a customer returned a couple of servers. To this day, well, until now, I guess, 6 people knew of that server's existence. 2 know where it is physically located, even now. And it was DL360G7, dual hex core, 56 gig of RAM, which was great. ASXi went on it, GNS3, half a ton of 7200 images. I started learning about EIGRP v3, OSPF v3, and IPv6 config. Was that exactly what I was going to get on the platform I was deploying? No, but it got me a level of confidence in knowing where I was going with this. And later on, that was actually used to lab the Onyx migration that we did from the 7200s to ASRs. You can do some wonderful things. So you can put CSR 1000V as your ASL 1K, XRV as your ASR 9K, and then you can bridge into GNS3 on the virtual machine that you're running. It's great. There's loads you can do. So not having a huge lab to play with is really not an excuse for doing this. So the implementation. So essentially, we have 2 ASA firewalls at the top. That then goes down to the staff network. The tenant network goes to 2 3925Es and down as layer 2 to the 3750X stack, which then has a per building switch. Internet space network, which is raw IP, essentially. So the tenant network is RFC 1918 managed through the firewalls. Internet space, we provide the customer with a routable block. So that comes down through the routers and down to layer 2. So the rollout. The rollout, we did the v4 first. Everyone should do that. So having a stable platform on v4 will give you the confidence to then take on that platform and go from further on. So firewalls went in as a direct replacement, staff network was upgraded, new staff cloud servers were built, new switches were put in for tenants. We still had all the old network. So we essentially routed it through the 3925s, through the new switches, and then back down to the old network. And it was a case of going through each tenant and moving the block from the old network to the new network. And we did it across a number of mornings, 6 till 8, and we didn't have any problems, which was really, really good. Admittedly, I did kind of play with some things, like 64 tunneling with AnyConnect and NAT64, but that was on networks that weren't in use, honest. So the V6. So we enabled the firewalls, and then we did some of the staff on the server network. And we did the entire Windows infrastructure. And believe me, the Windows guys were really not happy with doing this. V6, we've never done it before, we're not sure. Just enable it and see what happens. And it didn't cause any problems. We then did the RDS infrastructure as well, and we actually tested it on the RITE meeting in London on their V6 on the SSID, and it just worked. It was great. I was really happy with it. And we told the customer, oh, we'll enable it V6 on your client networks at some point in the future. And I did it the next day. And about 2 weeks later, are you still going to do this? Ping Google for me? Ah, what's these colons? So, pseudo-automation. So, I am not a DevOps guy, but I kind of know PHP a little bit. So, and this was at the time where I didn't really have the time to start learning a lot of the platforms and things that they are now. So I just wrote a load of PHP scripts, which basically spat out config for me. Access lists, VLANs, subnets, prefixes, etc., etc. Again, I didn't have to be a huge DevOps engineer to be able to do this. But we had some fun along the way. So we started rolling out the tenant network, and we switched from OSPF, so you switch from static to OSPF v3 on the way down. Data sheets don't always tell the truth. They say they do, but they don't always. So we had some interesting problems along the way. V6 is not as mature as V4. There's some missing features. For example, I like global addresses on things like HSRP. I had to upgrade code to be able to do that, despite saying it should work. Nasty memory leak on the 3750Xs, which caused them to randomly reboot. And it was somewhere between resources, VRFs, and OSPF v3, and in the end I had to design around it. I essentially took the VRFs off at the time and took OSPF v3 off and routed it down that way. Security is kind of interesting when you're doing it on mid-layer platforms. You can't do everything you really want to. So one of the really interesting things is ideally you'd like to put ACLs on each SVI type scenario. You can do that, but you can't do the number of ACLs that you require. So the number of ACLs is limited to maybe, I'm not sure what the number is, but possibly 32 or something like that. And I only found this out when I started running the script that had created all the ACLs for me, and it went, oh, error. So you have to redesign around that. So I created a slightly different URL, a slightly different ACL, which is still very secure, and it still worked. But there is caveats, especially on things like our platform where you have TCAM to consider. And essentially, as soon as you enable v6, you half your resources on that platform. Macs, routes, everything like that. So you have to be careful with it. And ultimately, a layer 3 switch is not a router. Whereas the company I was at had taught me that we should deploy layer 3 switches an awful lot. Once you start doing a little bit clever things on these things, it doesn't exactly work out that way. We enabled the Atlas probe, which was the first in Sunderland. And I think it's still the first v6 campus in the Northeast as far as, well, certainly in Sunderland, possibly the Northeast, certainly one of the first. There's still lots of things we don't control. Still a moving target 4 years later. And the customer has now switched from using little routers on the end that we don't control to EagleWare, which we can get access to. It doesn't support IPv6. It's a Linux box. It does support IPv6. EagleWare won't enable the v6 because of all their management features. So we were kind of done, but we really weren't. So the new site came on board, and I had to work out how to integrate it. Do I use VRF Lite? Yes. And I put the staff as primary, and I put the internet in a VRF. Then I realized that I couldn't do v6 in that VRF. See the comment before about platform limitations. So I had to switch it around. There was also no budget for the 3925 line cards to make this work. So I did something that you should never, ever do, which is route over spanning tree controlled links. Don't ever do it. Please don't, unless you absolutely have to. And I had to. And then I started tweaking MST, so I got both of the links up at the same time, both OSPF adjacencies up, and I put BFD on it, and it does work. It probably shouldn't, but it does. And the CPEs didn't support v6, which I'm still grateful for that disti for, because their data sheets online had version 3 hardware information against them, which did support v6. They shipped v1, which didn't. So that's still a moving target. It's ironic because they're actually redesigning that at the moment. We probably are going to do similar to the tenant network and roll it all out on v6. Now, there's always some truth in statistics. So this is the graph from Akamai, and essentially, UKNOF, the v6 council, always saying, oh, v6 traffic is going up, and mine wasn't. So that kind of bugged me a little bit. So why wasn't I seeing it? So how do I force more traffic? How do I know what's going on here? So we had a POP and IMAP server that most of the tenants use, so I pushed v6 on that. And I thought, well, I'll leave it till the morning, and then I'll go in and I'll see what the stats are like tomorrow. Then I got a phone call on the way to work. Why can't anyone send email? Which was related to an SMTP ACL, which I hadn't put the v6 addresses on. Oops. But I still only saw a minor v6 sort of cache on the logs. So what was happening here? So I started looking at DHCP and routing, and I'd realized, oh, DHCP. There was some interesting errors in the logs. Now, I really wish I had these errors to show you because they really didn't tell me what was going on at all. But I managed to suss it in that all of these, between our infrastructure and the desktops of the clients, there is essentially half a ton of little Wi-Fi routers, D-Links, Netgears. I kind of worked out that they were actually acting in rooted mode. So they were double natting. So in essentially, all of the DHCP that I was sending down, that was all great. But on v6, it was trying to request prefixes, which didn't work. I then started playing around with CentOS and DHCPD, and it was an old CentOS 6 version. Everything said it should work. It just blatantly didn't. Then I remembered another UKNOF presentation, which was Kia. Great little DHCP server. Built a VM, wrote a Kia config, routed into the /48 down for the prefix delegation, wrote another quick PHP script to delegate all of the VLAN changes and all the SVI changes, and generated the Kia config for me, restarted, and 20 minutes later, I had half a ton more v6 coming through it, which was really nice. So now, I could send you a chart and graph from the last year or so, which has nice 700 meg peaks, but we're going to go the last month. This is obviously when everyone's children are still off and things like that, so it's quite a quiet period. And again, this is not a huge network at all. So what we've got is peaks of around 150 meg, and we've got around a 13 meg average, which isn't huge, I know that, but it's more about getting it done. So if we look at v6, interesting thing is the peaks are higher, but the average is less. So on the best days, having went through this, I actually spent probably a couple of days just going through various time points. At the best days, 45% of v6 traffic is v6. Worst, it's 5. Average 16% I can live with because I still don't control half of these routers and D-Links and Netgears in the way. So we're going to go back to this business case I mentioned. So is there one? Kind of. Now, the argument I used at the time was, at some point, someone's going to ask us for V6. Now, we've got a customer who wants to do this, and they're really friendly with us, and they're happy for us to do this, and they trust us. So do we learn the lessons now, or do we wait until a really large customer who has a really high value with us come to us and then says, we need you V6, and we go, oops. And that happened. It only happened, don't get me wrong, it only happened about 9 months ago. A customer came to us, and this is a customer who weren't happy with a couple of things, and they were kind of talking to other providers, and they discovered they needed V6. And the reason why? A doorbell system, or a door entry system, believe it or not, from China. And they'd bought all this. It was the upgraded model of the one they had. It only supported IPv6. Yes, believe it or not. And the customer came to us and said, oh, well, we've talked to providers we were talking to, and they can't really do it. Can you? Yes, would you like to see our case studies? Would you like to see the network we did? And it was very much a whole fist bump, I told you so moment. And there was some kind of bumps along the way, but we had it done in, what, a week to 2 weeks? Not difficult. We did the addressing plan with them. We had some tweaks to statically address the servers, and there was one legacy application. I think this is like a hospice type customer, whereas it uses V4 SQL broadcast. So, but they're quite happy. They're actually educating the vendor and trying to get the new version, so that's cool. So the summary of all this, do infrastructure companies ask the V6 question? I'm not sure they do. Should they? Maybe. Education is still the factor. You really need to start educating your staff and educating yourself. There's many ways to do it now, HE, RIPE, etc., etc. There's loads of ways to do it. There's lots of ways to test this without having a whole load of lab equipment to play with. Virtualization, certainly there's now things like Cisco Viral, there's ESXi, there's half a ton of ways to do this now. That should not be a showstopper. It mostly just does work. Please remember your first-op security. There is first-op security on this network, I should add. Is it as nice as I'd like it to be? Not really, but it does work, it is secure. And at some point, your customers will start asking for this. So we're actually starting to finally see requests for this, so that's a good thing. And that's the story about how we did an Atlas probe the hard way. Any questions? You? Deathly silence. Oh, hello, Tim. Hang on a sec.
Hi, Tim very Proby. Do you find that because you've got V6, you need fewer IPs on the outside of your NAT, or do you not worry about that?
No, believe me or not, I've been very inspired by things that Pete at Mythic and so on have done. I've really been tempted to go V6 only, just mainly because I could, just to see what would happen. But we've essentially had to leave it dual stack for now. Would I like to do that? Oh, yes.
I wasn't saying do you need to get rid of it. Do you
need less? No,
IP,
because we've left most of it in place. And sadly, certainly on the internet space, we don't control the routers, so we can't really force it on people either. It would be nice to get to that point. Anyone? No? Cool.
Thank you, Chris.